Peace treaties were often described as civilized instruments, ink and wax replacing fang and fire. But Ophelia Valewood had learned that civilization could be another name for polished cruelty. The old wolves spoke of balance, of order, of law. Yet they measured stability by how much of a daughter they could surrender without hearing her scream. In stories, accords ended wars. In courts like Ironhold, accords redistributed suffering, wrapped it in ritual language, and called it necessary. By the time Ophelia was marched through the basalt gates in iron cuffs, she understood the underlying rule more clearly than any elder ever had the courage to say aloud. Peace lasted longest when women paid for it. The chain between her wrists was short enough to force her shoulders inward and long enough to bruise the bones of her hips each time the escort jerked it. The iron had been cold at dawn along the Valewood border, but by the time they reached Ironhold's upper court, it had warmed against her skin like a fever she could not sweat out. Her travel cloak had once been green, stitched with the leaf mark of her house. Now it was road gray, damp at the hem, and smelling of horse leather and fear. No one from Valewood had ridden beside her after the first mile. Not her mother, whose mouth had trembled but stayed closed. Not her uncle, who sat on the border council and preached duty. Not even her younger cousin, who used to sneak her sweetroot cakes and whisper that Ophelia was the only one who listened when she spoke. Sold as treaty tribute, signed over with household seal, delivered intact. The Moon Accord hearing took place in a circular chamber open to the sky, where rain light filtered through iron lattice and painted the stone floor in bars. Elders sat in a crescent of carved obsidian chairs. Nobles lined the outer ring in silks and armor, smelling of amber oil, metal polish, and expensive contempt. At the center stood Guinevere Nightshade, composed as winter, one gloved hand resting over a sealed scroll. She did not look at Ophelia first, she looked at the crowd. By authority of council and bloodline covenant, Guinevere said, voice carrying with precise trained softness. A ruling has been rendered concerning the Valewood tribute female. For the protection of succession and state equilibrium, any firstborn pup conceived by Ophelia Valewood will be transferred at birth to elder guardianship. The words struck harder than any blow. Ophelia dragged in breath that scraped her throat raw. Transferred? An elder with a narrow face and moonstone rings did not meet her gaze. Confiscated, he corrected, as if refining diction in a legal lesson. To prevent mixed-line instability. Laughter moved through part of the gallery, brief and ugly. Guinevere broke the wax and held the decree where all could see. 3 elder sigils. Council mark. Then, lower right, burned into the parchment in dark green resin, the crest of Valewood. Her house crest. Her legs nearly failed. The guard behind her tightened his grip before she could fold, fingers biting into the back of her arm hard enough to numb it to the elbow. No one challenged the seal. No one questioned the timing. No one asked why a hypothetical child needed punishment before conception. Ophelia stared at that forged certainty until the chamber blurred. Heat pulsed beneath her skin in uneven waves, a body response that felt dangerously close to panic. She heard herself think, clear and immediate, I am still breathing, so this is still happening. And if this is happening, they will take everything I ever make with my own body and call it lawful. The thought kept unfolding in present tense, relentless, as if time had narrowed to one knife edge. I am not a woman to them. I am a corridor. I am a gate they can lock from outside. If I kneel now, they will write the next order faster. If I scream, they will say hysteria proves unfitness. If I beg, they will remember how easy this was. State guardianship is mercy, Guinevere said, turning toward her at last. Given your uncertain status. My status? Ophelia's voice came rough. My bloodline sold me. Exactly. The word landed like a slap delivered with a smile. When the hearing adjourned, courtiers spilled into the side aisles murmuring about logistics as if discussing grain storage. Ophelia was hauled toward the lower registry hall, where tribute records were branded into copper tablets. The corridor walls sweated damp. Torch smoke clung to the ceiling. Every few steps she caught fragments of speech from passing attendants. Valewood girl. Dangerous breeding variable. Best to formalize seizure now. At the registry table, a clerk slid a second document toward her and tapped the signature line with a bone stylus. Acknowledgement of prenatal oversight. I will not sign. The clerk blinked once, surprised by tone rather than refusal. Your consent is ceremonial. The guard pressed her shoulders down toward the desk. Iron scraped stone. Pain flared through her wrists where the cuffs cut deeper. Thumbprint, then, the clerk said. A door behind them opened. Guinevere entered with two elders and did not lower her voice. We cannot afford uncertainty, she said. If she quickens, temple supervision begins immediately. Increase monitoring of her meals and tea. Moonwort in small quantities is deniable if she weakens early. Ophelia went still. One elder murmured, premature labor risks public sympathy. Only if she survives it, Guinevere replied. The room tilted, then snapped into brutal clarity. This was not only about a future child. This was about eliminating her cleanly inside procedure. The guard shoved her hand toward the ink pad. Ophelia moved. She twisted as the chain tightened, drove her shoulder backward into his sternum, and felt him stagger. The stylus clattered. She slammed her cuffed hands into the clerk's face, enough to break his grip, then bolted through the service arch before anyone recalibrated. Shouts detonated behind her. Stop her! Seal the south stair! Do not damage the wrists. She is property under a cord. Property. The word chased her like teeth. She ran blind for the first 20 strides, through a spice passage that stank of cumin and old grease, down a spiral stair slick with condensation, across a laundry court where wet linens cracked in the wind like pale flags. The chain between her wrists bounced against her belly and hip. Her breath came ragged, then burning. Somewhere above, alarm bells began to pulse, measured and calm, a palace heartbeat telling every guard exactly where prey might run. Ophelia did not know Ironhold's map, but she understood institutions. Grand halls were watched. Servant arteries were not. She cut left where heat rose, right where voices thickened, then squeezed through a half-latched door into a narrow tunnel lined with weapon racks and oil jars. The air changed, metal and coal and sweat layered over storm damp. Armory wing. A pair of young soldiers saw her and reached for her. Stand down, one barked. On your knees. She kept moving. The first grabbed her chain. She yanked hard, throwing him off balance. The second swung the butt of a training spear toward her shoulder. She ducked, stumbled, and the spear struck iron instead of bone, driving the cuff ring into her wrist with a grinding impact. Pain flashed white. Skin split. Warm blood slid across her palm and over the metal. The world narrowed. Bootsteps approached from the main forge lane, unhurried and heavy enough to shift attention without force. The two soldiers straightened instinctively. Behind them, through haze from quenched steel, she saw him. He wore common leathers, scuffed at the edges, no noble insignia, no cloak clasp, only a soldier's bracer and a narrow scar running from his left cheek to his jaw, as if lightning had chosen him once and decided to leave a signature. Dark hair, rain damp at the temples, shoulders built like a gate, presence like a storm held on a leash. Kane, one soldier said, almost relieved. Tribute runner. Orders? Kane's gaze dropped to her bleeding wrist. Then he inhaled. Pine smoke, storm rain, wild ozone before lightning strikes. The scent hit Ophelia with such force that her knees nearly gave. A low thrum built in her chest, deep and urgent, and awareness prickled along her spine as if every sleeping nerve had been called to attention at once. Heat lanced from sternum to lower belly, sharp enough to make her gasp. Not pain, recognition, violent and sacred. No, she thought, terrified by the certainty blooming through her. No, not now. Cain froze for one betrayed second. Amber bled into his irises, bright and feral, ancient power surfacing before discipline slammed over it like a door. When he spoke, his voice was steady enough to pass inspection. "She is injured," he said. "Release the chain." "Registry marked her non-compliant," the other soldier protested. "We are to return her for restraint." Cain stepped closer. The forge light caught the scar on his face and turned it silver. Under Battlefield Statute 17, wounded non-combatants transfer to nearest sworn watch until stabilized. She is under mine. The younger soldiers exchanged a look, uncertain, then obeyed. One fumbled for the cuff key. Ophelia could barely hear the click of unlocking metal over the rush in her ears. Cain dropped to one knee before her, ostensibly to inspect the wound, head bowed in a posture no common soldier should have offered a tribute woman in open view. His hand hovered near her skin, waiting. "May I?" he asked quietly. No one had asked her that in months. She nodded once. His fingers closed around her wrist, careful, warm, unbearably sure. The bond thread inside her pulled tight as drawn wire, and for a suspended breath, she knew two truths at once. If the court saw what had just awakened between them, both of them would be hunted by law before dusk. And if she let this man walk away now, she would spend the rest of her life hearing that torn, wordless part of herself call after him. The torn, wordless part of her did not quiet when he released her wrist. It tightened. It listened to him breathe. Cain kept one hand beneath her forearm to steady her, while he wrapped a strip of clean linen around the split skin. His thumb braced above the pulse point, never pressing hard enough to hurt. The two young soldiers lingered with the awkward vigilance of men who sensed they were standing inside a moment they did not understand. Forge heat rolled through the lane in slow waves. Somewhere behind the racks, steel hissed in quench water. Ophelia could smell oil, coal ash, wet wool, and beneath all of it, the storm rain scent that had detonated through her body at first contact and still would not loosen its grip. "She returns to registry after binding," one soldier said, as if reciting from a wall tablet. Cain did not look up. "After the infirmary confirms she can stand without reopening the wound." "She ran. She bled." The answer landed flat, practical, unarguable. Cain tied the linen, then raised his gaze to hers, and the world narrowed again to the distance between them. There was no flourish in his expression, no softening smile to reassure her. Only fierce control. His pupils were still too wide, his breathing too measured, as if he were holding back a force that wanted language and did not care for consequences. Ophelia swallowed and tasted copper at the back of her throat. Her skin felt too tight for her body. Heat pulsed beneath it in erratic surges, answering his nearness in ways that made no sense after years of numb endurance. She had spent so long teaching herself to endure touch without feeling, command without protest, humiliation without collapse. Now one scarred soldier in plain leathers had asked permission once, and all her practiced distance was coming apart at the seams. I am standing in an armory with blood on my hand and chains at my feet, and my body knows him. I do not want this. I want this so sharply it frightens me. If this is the bond, then it is not gentle, not pretty, not a blessing dropped from moonlight into open palms. It is a hook in the sternum, a pull in the belly, a command written through marrow. Run, and it follows. Deny it, and it waits. Accept it, and everything can be used against us. They will take any weakness and call it law. They will call this leverage. They will call me unstable. They will call him a traitor if he is what I think he is. And if he is not, then I am losing my mind in a forge corridor with witnesses. Cain, she said, because she needed to hear his name in her own voice, needed to test whether speech still belonged to her. Why did you help me? His jaw flexed once. Because you were being harmed. That has never stopped this court. No, he said. It has not. The admission carried old anger, old memory, not courtly outrage, personal. The younger soldier shifted. We need movement. Cain rose in one smooth motion and offered Ophelia his hand without touching her first. Infirmary, he said quietly, giving her the choice in front of witnesses. You can walk beside me or behind me, not in front, with your balance like this. It was such a strange, specific mercy she almost laughed. Instead, she set her palm in his. His fingers closed. Another jolt ran through her, less violent than the first, deeper, like a second pulse aligning with her own. The animal part of her went rigid and attentive. He felt it too. His shoulders tightened, then settled. They moved through the forge lane with the two soldiers trailing at a distance that was technically custodial and functionally respectful. Cain did not drag her, did not hurry her when the first wave of dizziness struck at the stairwell arch. He shifted his body to shield her from passing workers, broad enough to block jostling without appearing possessive. At each threshold, he announced the hazard before they reached it. Step down. Whetstone. Low beam. No one had narrated safety for her since childhood. By the time they entered the infirmary wing, the bond fever had begun in earnest. The chamber smelled of bitterroot, clean linen, and lavender crushed under warm water. Beds lined both walls, most empty at this hour except for an older guard with a splinted ankle snoring softly by the far brazier. A healer glanced up from a mortar, took one look at Ophelia's face, and swore under her breath. What did they do to you now? Cut from a cuff ring, Cain said, fever climbing fast. The healer touched Ophelia's temple, then her throat, frowning. This is not from a wrist wound. She is in bond shock. Silence snapped across the room. The healer looked from Ophelia to Cain and understood too much in a single breath, but she was wise enough not to speak it aloud. I need willow tincture, lavender cloths, broth, and privacy, she said briskly. If this peaks, she will shake until dawn. Keep her from thrashing the injury open. A runner came to the door before Cain could answer, breathless with message urgency. Master Healer, Southern Barracks collapse, 3 crushed underbeam. The healer cursed again, already moving. She pressed a bundle into Cain's hands. You, soldier, you stay. If she seizes, hold shoulders and hips, not wrists. If delirium turns violent, call for me. And do not, under any circumstance, force medicine between clenched teeth. When she was gone, the room felt suddenly too large, too quiet, too intimate. Ophelia sat on the bed's edge, shaking hard now, the fever burning through her in surges that made her vision stutter. Cain set the supplies down, then crouched to eye level, keeping distance. May I remove the outer cuff brace? He asked. It will pull on the wound if you jerk. She nodded. He unlocked the remaining iron and laid it on the floor, far from her line of sight. The clink of metal against stone made her flinch anyway. Look at me, he said. She did. His gaze held, steady and unblinking, and the panic receded half a step. He dampened lavender cloths and pressed one against her neck only after warning her where his hand would be. He lifted a spoon of broth when her hand shook too hard and waited each time for her to open her mouth, never forcing, never coaxing with false sweetness. When she spilled, he wiped her chin with the same practical care he would have given a wounded comrade. The restraint in him was not coldness. It was discipline built around tenderness sharp enough to be dangerous in this place. Hours blurred into torch changes and fever waves. Once she woke to find him sitting beside the bed in straight-backed stillness, Soldier's leathers creased from long vigil, eyes fixed on the infirmary door as if he expected attack. Once she woke to his palm hovering above her forearm, not touching, waiting to see whether she would accept contact. She turned her wrist upward in answer. He took her hand and held it until the shaking eased. Near midnight, the nightmare broke through. She was on a temple dais with chains threaded through carved moonstone, belly heavy, breath torn open by pain while masked elders reached between her knees with gloved hands and legal words. She could not see her child's face, only the bundle carried away into smoke while someone stamped a seal into wax and said, "Transfer complete." Ophelia jerked awake with a hoarse cry, clawing at the blanket, heart hammering so hard it hurt. Kane was there instantly, not pinning her, only bracing her shoulders so she could orient. "They are taking the baby," she gasped, not caring that it made no sense yet, not caring that fear had stripped reason to bone. "They wrote it. They signed it. They will drug me and call it mercy, and I will wake empty." Kane's expression changed then, a dark certainty crossing his face like storm shadow over water. His first words came low and unguarded. "No one takes what is mine if she does not consent." He stilled, as if he had stepped over a line he could not afford to cross, and corrected himself with visible care. "No one takes what is yours." The second sentence should have soothed less than the first. Instead, it settled in her like an oath spoken at blade point. He meant both. He was trying to give her the safer one. She studied him through the fever haze. "Why correct it?" "Because this court steals language first," he said. "Ownership, duty, protection. They twist words until a cage sounds like shelter. I will not do that to you." She wanted to ask who had done it to him. She wanted to ask why his authority felt larger than his rank. She wanted to ask why every instinct in her recognized the shape of his silence. But exhaustion dragged at her bones, and his hand on her shoulder was warm, grounded, real. "Sleep," he murmured. When dawn bruised the windows pale, she woke to find him still there. By late afternoon, she was strong enough to walk. Strong enough, the court decided, to be displayed. A maid arrived with folded garments and a mouth set in neutral lines. "Hunt feast attendance is mandatory for tribute households and assigned wards." "I am neither household nor ward." The maid lowered her eyes. "I was told to repeat the instruction, not discuss truth." Ophelia dressed in a dark gown too fine for comfort and too plain for status, her bandaged wrist hidden under long sleeves. Kane waited outside the infirmary arch in fresh soldier leathers, hair tied back, scar stark against his cheek. His expression gave nothing away when he saw her, but his gaze swept the corridor once, cataloging exits and blind corners. "Can you endure one hall length with no support?" he asked quietly. "Yes. If that changes, tell me before you fall." He escorted her through the lower colonnade into the Hunt Feast chamber, where antler chandeliers cast gold light over carved tables and trophy banners. Music drifted from a string trio near the hearth, too delicate for the room's sharp mood. Nobles clustered in bright knots of silk and steel, laughter pitched one tone above cruelty. As Ophelia entered, conversation thinned, then resumed with curated carelessness. "Valewood's tribute survives. I heard Moonwort failed. Give it another cycle." The words were soft, meant to be heard. Guinevere stood near the high table in silver-gray velvet, radiantly composed, receiving bows as though she wore a crown already. Her gaze found Ophelia, paused at the bandaged wrist, and sharpened. Then she smiled for the room and raised her cup. "How fortunate," she called, "that our guest has recovered enough to join us. We must be vigilant with such delicate assets. Captain, inspect her for contraband runes. We cannot risk sabotage at a state feast." A hush slid outward. Everyone understood the command for what it was. Public handling disguised as protocol. 3 guards stepped forward. Kane moved with them, one pace behind Ophelia's right shoulder, posture neutral, hands empty. The lead guard stopped too close, breath sour with wine. "Arms out," he said. Ophelia lifted her chin. "Under what written charge?" He grinned. "Under mine." His hand shot for her elbow, fingers digging toward the bruise beneath her sleeve. Kane inserted his forearm between them so fast the motion blurred, deflecting the grip without striking. The guard snarled and swung a backhand meant for Kane's jaw. Kane took the hit on his shoulder, rotated, and trapped the man's wrist in a joint lock that forced him to his knees without a crack or tear. The second guard lunged from the left. Kane stepped inside the attack, stripped the short baton, and sent it skidding harmlessly under a table. The third went for Ophelia's waist chain. Kane pivoted, hooked his ankle, and dropped him flat with a controlled sweep. No blood, no frenzy, precision. The hall erupted in shouts. "Stand down! Seize him!" He struck a royal guard. Kane released the kneeling man and straightened, chest rising once. His voice carried clean through the noise. Battlefield Statute 17 and accompanying Feast Addendum 4. Sanctuary extends to wounded non-combatants under sworn watch within active halls. Lady Ophelia Valewood is medically designated and under my watch by infirmary order. Inspection without written charge constitutes assault. Silence answered, shocked and brittle. No one expected a common soldier to quote law in full cadence before nobles. No one expected him to be right. Guinevere's smile vanished. "You overstep beyond your station." Kane bowed exactly as low as rank required, no lower. "Then charge me formally, and we can test station against statute before witnesses." For one suspended beat, Ophelia thought Guinevere might order archers and be done with pretense. Instead, the noblewoman recalculated in plain sight. Fury shuddered behind political poise. "Remove the disruptive guard from my feast," Guinevere said coldly, "and escort the tribute to assigned quarters. We will review protocols tomorrow." Two palace bailiffs advanced, uncertain. Kane handed over the confiscated baton first, palms open, signaling compliance while denying guilt. As they took position at his flanks, he turned his head toward Ophelia without fully facing her. "Walk," he said, voice low enough for her alone. "Do not run. Panic is what they are waiting for." She walked. The corridor beyond the feast hall was cooler, torchlight thinner, the noise behind them muffled by heavy doors. One bailiff peeled off at the stairwell, sent to report. The other kept Kane in view but did not bind him yet. At the bend near the old tapestry gallery, Kane slowed half a step, enough for Ophelia to match stride. "You should not have done that," she whispered. "Correct. They could execute you for less." "Yes. Then why?" He looked at her then, fully, and the caged force in his gaze showed itself for a breath. Predatory calm, deliberate and lethal, held in check by choice rather than weakness. "Because fear thrives on witnesses who do nothing," he said. "I am done being one." The answer struck deep, not because it was romantic, but because it was costly. He had spent political capital he should not possess, and personal safety he plainly valued, and he had done it without touching her autonomy, without claiming payment, without asking trust as reward. At the door to her assigned chamber, the bailiff finally cleared his throat. "Soldier Kane, you are confined pending inquiry." Kane inclined his head. "Then inquire." He stepped back to let Ophelia enter first. Even now, inside, the room was narrow but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and one window overlooking the inner wall. Ophelia turned at the threshold. Kane stood in the corridor between two armed men, shoulders squared, expression unreadable except for the smallest softening at the corner of his mouth when he saw she was steady on her feet. "Ophelia," he said. It was the first time he had spoken her name like it belonged in his mouth. "Yes?" "If they bring tea, you did not watch poured, do not drink it." Then the bailiffs moved him down the corridor and out of sight. Ophelia closed the door and leaned against it, palm pressed over the bandage at her wrist where his fingers had first circled her skin. The court had taken her home, her name, and the shape of her future. But tonight one truth stood where fear had lived alone. She was no longer unseen. The knot behind her ribs loosened by one careful thread, and when a soft knock came an hour later with a tray, she opened the door only enough to inspect the pot herself. Exactly as he had taught her. The lid came off the pot with a soft ceramic scrape, and steam curled up carrying chamomile, honey, and the faint bitter metal note she had learned to fear in a single day. Moonwort. Not enough to shout from the cup, enough to hide in sweetness. The maid holding the tray kept her expression blank, but her fingers tightened on the rim when Ophelia looked up. Not guilt. Fear. Who poured it? Ophelia asked. Kitchen mistress? The maid said too quickly. Under noble instruction. Which noble? A beat. Lady Guinevere's steward. Ophelia set the lid back down and stepped into the hall so the maid had to meet her eyes. Tell your kitchen mistress I spilled it. Tell her I cried while doing it, if that keeps you safe. The maid's throat worked. She gave one small nod and backed away, shoes whispering over stone. Ophelia watched until she turned the corner, then carried the full pot to the washstand and emptied it into the basin. The scent rose harsher when concentrated. Cain had been right. Again. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed both hands flat over her abdomen, not because there was movement there yet, not because she knew anything with certainty, but because the decree had taught her what this court believed she was, a vessel with no vote. The bond had taught her something else. The territory of her body was not vacant land. A hard knock struck the door. This time, there was no tray. 2 council pages in gray livery waited with a sealed summons and 3 guards behind them. By elder directive, the taller page recited, "You are required for immediate temple evaluation concerning reproductive compliance and succession risk." Ophelia did not touch the scroll. At this hour? Law has no hour. Law has signatures, she said. Read me the names. He hesitated, then complied. Elder Corvin, Elder Mailer, Elder Isabet. The same ring of men and women who had watched Guinevere reveal the confiscation decree and said nothing when Ophelia asked why a child could be condemned in theory. She lifted her chin. I will come in the morning with healer witness. That is not the order. It is my condition. The shortest guard shifted his weight, hand near baton. The corridor held for one taut moment, and Ophelia understood the non-trivial trade-off in front of her with painful clarity. Refuse entirely and be dragged now, comply without terms, and validate every future violation. She chose the narrow path between. Tell your elders this, she said. I walk to the temple at first bell with a witness and my own feet. If they want obedience, they can tolerate sunlight. The pages looked at one another, uncertain whether they had been dismissed or defied. Finally, they retreated with stiff bows that were not bows. The guards followed. When the corridor emptied, Ophelia locked the door and leaned her forehead against the wood until the grain pressed marks into her skin. I am tired of negotiating the right to stand in my own bones. I am tired of measuring every word for how it can be turned into rope. I am not naive. If they decide tonight that force is easier, this lock is nothing. But each condition I name is a stake in the ground. Witness, daylight, paper. Say it, again and again, until someone hears the shape of a person where they expected compliance. If I stop naming it, they win twice. They take the choice, then they take the language for having had one. Rain began against the narrow window, steady and thin. She did not sleep. At first bell, the healer who had treated her fever arrived in a hastily belted cloak. Gray hair half-braided, mouth set like carved oak. I am called Anwen, she said, as if beginning mattered. I dislike being summoned by councils that hide motives in incense smoke. Ophelia almost smiled. Then we have common ground. They crossed the inner court under a sky the color of pewter. Guards flanked them at respectful distance, less escort than containment with manners. The temple of the moon goddess rose from black stone at the compound's northern edge, its steps slick with rain, carved wolves at the base worn smooth by generations of petitioning hands. Inside, blue fire burned in low braziers. The air smelled of myrrh and wet wool, and old dust trapped in drapery folds. Guinevere stood near the central dais in pale silver, gloved hands folded, expression arranged into concern. "Ophelia," she said warmly, "how responsible of you to attend." "Your pages were persuasive." Guinevere's smile sharpened by a degree. "We all serve stability." Anwen did not bow. "State your clinical concern." Elder Corvin answered from the right aisle. "Bond fever, irregular cycle reports, and probable quickening signs following unauthorized contact." The phrase landed in Ophelia's chest like a struck bell. Probable quickening. The chamber seemed to narrow around those words, every eye suddenly measuring her in future tense. Guinevere stepped closer. "If there is conception, the decree activates. We must prepare guardianship early to prevent confusion." "Confusion for whom?" Ophelia asked. "The mother or the council?" No one answered directly. That was answer enough. Anwen guided Ophelia behind a linen screen for a scent and pulse exam, old methods older than blood tests, precise in skilled hands. Ophelia sat on a low stool while the healer pressed 2 fingers to the inside of her wrist, then at the base of her throat, then lightly over her lower abdomen where warmth had begun to collect in recent days for no reason she could name. Anwen inhaled once, sharply, her eyes lifted. "Well," she said quietly, "not probable." Ophelia held very still. "Say it plain." "You are quickened. Early, but clear." The room tilted without moving. Fear arrived first, then fierce, startling tenderness, then rage at the memory of the decree held up to a laughing court. Her instincts sharpened until she could hear the tiny crackle of moonfire in the nearest brazier and the scrape of Guinevere's ring against fabric outside the screen. Anwen lowered her voice further. "Listen to me. Early quickening in bond-joined lines can be stable if stress is managed and decisions remain with the mother. You need rest, clean food, and no unvetted herbs, especially no moonwort in steeped drink." Ophelia swallowed. "They already tried." "I know." "You knew." Anwen's jaw tightened. "I know the scent in a cup when I smell one." When they emerged, Guinevere took one step forward, eager restraint barely masking triumph. "Healer?" Anwen folded her hands in sleeves. "My findings are private to patient and designated guardian under sanctuary law." Elder Maelor snapped, "You answer to council authority." "I answer to oath first," Anwen replied. "The prevailing consensus among competent healers is that coerced intervention increases risk to mother and destabilizes both line and pack. You asked for clinical assessment. I have given what law permits." Guinevere's voice softened, dangerous in its gentleness. "How principled." "We will revisit your appointment." Anwen met her stare. "Do." By the time Ophelia returned to her chamber, pressure had multiplied from every direction. 2 extra guards stationed outside her door, meal trays sealed with council wax. A written notice slid under the threshold requiring temple attendance for a moon observance 3 nights hence, signature block crowded with elder marks and one elegant flourish she recognized as Guinevere's. Cain did not come all day. The absence hurt in ways she resented. She paced from bed to window to washstand, counting breaths, rehearsing legal phrases, testing every latch twice. At dusk, a runner dropped a folded scrap through the door gap and vanished before the guard could question him. No seal. No name. 2 lines in compact script. Inquiry delayed. Watch changed at midnight. Do not accept tea at observance. Trust Anwen. The letters were Kane's, the strokes cut deep enough to nearly tear the page. When midnight came, the corridor outside her chamber shifted from murmurs to quiet boots. A soft scrape at the door, then the low cadence she had already learned to recognize, even through wood. Ophelia, she opened. Kane stepped inside and shut the door with his back, listening until the guard rounds passed the intersection. He looked as if he had not slept, stubble dark at his jaw, a fading bruise along his collarbone where someone had tested his compliance during inquiry. Soldier leathers, no insignia. Scar bright in candlelight. You should not be here, she whispered. Correct again. He did not move closer immediately. The space between them throbbed with unsaid things, with the bond's relentless awareness and the court's appetite for leverage. Finally, he held out a thin leather packet. Copied statutes, he said. Sanctuary, consent, maternal claim rights in pre-coronation disputes. They bury useful law under ceremonial language. Read the margins. I marked what they fear. She took the packet. Their fingers brushed and a low thrum built in her chest, steadier than panic, stronger than hunger. I was examined, she said, his gaze locked on hers. And quickened. For a heartbeat he looked stripped raw, astonishment and fierce protectiveness, and a fragile kind of joy crossing his face before discipline returned. Not gone? Never gone. Just reordered around the new truth. Are you in pain? He asked. Not now. Dizzy? Sometimes? Nausea. Only when council pages speak? That pulled a brief, crooked breath from him that might have been laughter in another life. The sound lasted 3 seconds and dissolved. He stepped closer, slow enough for refusal. May I touch you? She nodded. He placed his palm over the back of her hand, then, when she remained steady, lifted both their joined hands to rest lightly above the place where warmth pooled low and constant. No claim, no possession. A vow in posture only. For a long moment neither spoke. Rain tapped the window in patient rhythm. Torchlight moved over the wall in gold bands, turning the room into a narrow harbor while the palace outside churned with politics and teeth. I have spent years surviving by becoming smaller, she said at last, voice barely above breath. Taking up less room, asking for less, yielding first so I could keep something unbroken for myself. Then you arrived and asked permission for every touch, and now I am expected to fight a council with my name half erased and my body under decree. I do not know if I am brave, Kane. I know I am angry. I know I am tired. I know there is a life beginning under my ribs, and they have already drafted forms to separate us. I am afraid that fear will make me foolish. His thumb moved once across her knuckles. Fear can sharpen. It does not only weaken. She searched his face. Who are you, truly? The question hung between them, a blade laid flat on open palms. He looked toward the door, then back. A man who hid too long because exposure gets people killed. A man who watched councils weaponize law and called it strategy. A man who will not watch that happen to you. Not the full truth. Not a lie. She accepted the partial answer because he had earned at least that much trust, and because the deeper revelation, whatever it was, had its own timing and danger. Their foreheads touched, brief and careful, a contact that felt more intimate than any embrace she had known. His breath warmed her skin. The bond settled around them like braided light she could not see, but could almost hear. If the observance turns coercive, he said, you invoke trial by scent and blood, loudly. Temple law predates council law. Witness cannot be denied once called. I thought that right was obsolete. So did they. That is why it still works. A horn sounded from the outer wall, 2 low notes signaling patrol shift. Kane stepped back, the loss of contact immediate and sharp. One more thing, he said. If they separate us tomorrow, remember this framework. Delay, demand witness, name law, make them choose between procedure and exposure. She held his gaze. And you? I will come. He left through the door as quietly as he had entered, another soldier in another corridor by the time the guard glanced up. The next evening, the moon observance began under scripted civility. Ophelia was escorted to the temple in a procession designed to look ceremonial rather than custodial. 2 candle-bearers, 1 elder page, 4 guards, Anwen at her left shoulder. Guinevere waited at the dais in ivory robes threaded with silver runes, every inch the devoted steward of public order. Cain was not visible among temple watch. Ophelia felt his absence like a missing stare. Ritual chants rose and fell. Incense thickened the air. A ceremonial cup was brought on a carved tray and placed in Anwen's hands first, as protocol required. The healer raised it to her nose, eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly, then passed it to Ophelia without comment. Moonwort, masked under jasmine and clove. Ophelia held the cup and did not drink. Name every herb in this blend, she said. Elder Isabet's patience snapped. Do not disrupt sacred rite with peasant suspicion. Then answer. Guinevere spread her hands serene. It is a calming infusion for maternal distress. You are among protectors. The word protectors made Ophelia's skin go cold. From the side aisle came bootsteps and a captain she recognized only faintly from barracks drills. He bowed to Guinevere and announced for all to hear. By emergency order, Soldier Cain reassigned to Northern Gate due border breach report. He has departed the inner compound. A lie with official posture. Clean. Efficient. Pressure surged through Ophelia's chest. This dynamic was exactly what Cain had warned her about. Isolate, soothe, document, control. Anwen's hand brushed her sleeve, a signal to hold ground. I invoke witness, Ophelia said clearly. I require transparent preparation of all ingested substances. Elder Corvin gestured to the guards. Proceed with rite. Note non-compliance. 2 guards advanced. Not rough yet, but close enough that refusal would become a physical contest inside 10 breaths. Anwen stepped in front of Ophelia and was pulled aside by a 3rd guard under orders murmured too low to catch. Guinevere descended 1 step from the dais, voice pitched for private sympathy and public theater at once. No one is harming you. Drink, and we move forward with dignity. Ophelia looked at the ring of faces around her. Elders, pages, guards, temple attendants pretending not to tremble. She understood the crux with brutal precision. If she refused entirely, they would frame instability and override. If she complied blindly, they would claim consent. She needed time, proof, a crack in their choreography. She lifted the cup to her mouth and let 1 controlled sip touch her tongue, no more than ritual could count. Bitter heat spread down her throat. She lowered the cup and met Guinevere's eyes. There, she said. Observed. Relief flickered through Guinevere's expression too quickly to hide. The chanting resumed. Moonfire leapt higher in the braziers as temple attendants drew fresh oil through the wicks. Ophelia stood through the next sequence, breathing evenly, reciting statutes in her head like prayer. Delay. Demand witness. Name law. Then the first contraction hit, sudden and gripping, folding her around a bolt of pain that stole the air from her lungs. Anwen reached for her at once. Sit her down. Elder Mailer's voice cracked like a whip across the chamber. To the birthing dais, activate seizure protocol. Chains were brought from beneath the carved platform, ceremonial links polished bright enough to pass for holy instruments. Guards moved to flank her. The temple doors boomed shut behind them, bar dropping into place. Ophelia straightened through the pain and tasted moonwort and fury on the same breath as the room closed in. Ophelia straightened through the pain and tasted moonwort and fury on the same breath as the room closed in. The chain the guards carried was ceremonial silver over iron core, polished for ritual, heavy enough to hold a struggling wolf. One guard reached for her elbow, another moved behind her with practiced restraint. Elder Malor lifted his hand toward the birthing dais as if ordering furniture placed, not a woman. "Secure her," he said. "Document resistance." Anwen shoved against the guard, pinning her, and won half a step. She ingested an unverified compound. She needs cleansing herbs and rest, not restraint. "She needs compliance," Guinevere answered, voice smooth as lacquer. "The state cannot wait on maternal panic." Contraction eased into trembling aftershocks. Ophelia kept her knees locked. She could feel sweat cooling at the base of her spine, hear the faint rattle of chain links as they shifted from one guard's gloved hand to the next. The temple seemed all edges now, moon-etched pillars, sharp incense, blue fire reflecting off polished stone in broken halos. At the center stood Guinevere, immaculate in ivory, watching with the serene attention of a woman expecting her script to hold. "On your knees," the lead guard said. Ophelia looked him in the face. "Under which temple clause does seizure begin without affirmed scent purity of administered drink?" His expression faltered. Behind him, Elder Corvin snapped, "Do not answer her legal theater." "It is not theater," Ophelia said louder. "It is law. You offered me a sacred cup. I was drugged." "Enough." Guinevere stepped closer. "You are quickened and unstable. This is intervention, not punishment." The word unstable punched through the chamber. So useful, so reusable. She had heard it tied to girls who objected, widows who questioned inheritances, mothers who asked where their sons had gone after council levies. A label that dissolved consent by declaration. I feel the room trying to write me in real time. Unstable, non-compliant, safely restrained, every word a nail. If I let them finish the sentence, my body becomes footnote to their authority, and my child becomes state inventory. I am afraid. I am shaking. I am still here. I know this right. I know this floor. I know the old law they buried because it makes liars breathe their own smoke. Speak now. Speak as if breath itself is jurisdiction. She drew air until her ribs ached and shouted, "Trial by scent and blood." The chamber jolted into stunned silence. Even the braziers seemed to pause. Elder Isabet recovered first. "Obsolete invocation. Denied." "Temple Codex, founding line 17, Ophelia fired back. "Any bonded mother under accusation of reproductive fraud may call scent adjudication before Moonfire and witness. Denial voids all council findings issued in this chamber for one cycle." That landed. Temple attendants shifted, glancing toward one another. A young acolyte near the west wall whispered the line under her breath, checking memory. Elder Corvin's jaw hardened. "Seize her anyway," he said. The lead guard reached. Ophelia moved first. She grabbed the ceremonial chain out of his hands with both wrists, ignoring the flare of pain in her old cuff wound, and whipped it downward against the stone lip of the dais. The first strike rang like a bell. The second snapped one link at the weakened rivet. The chain split, half clattering across the floor. Gasps broke around the chamber. Guinevere's composure cracked. "Stop her!" Ophelia lunged toward the elder record stand, seized the confiscation decree from its lacquered tray, and slammed it onto the open Moonfire brazier. Wax hissed. Parchment curled. Resin smoke rose thick and bitter, wrong in a way that was instantly obvious to every wolf in the room. Not cedar sealant, not temple pitch, wrought ink and false resin. "Breathe it!" Ophelia shouted over the sudden uproar. "Breathe your ruling!" Anwen was free now, shouldering between two stunned guards to stand at Ophelia's side. "Forgery compound," she called, voice cutting through chaos. Sour resin, copper solvent. No Elder archive uses this. Elder Mailer pointed at the doors. Open the hall. Remove her. Two guards ran to the great bronze leaves and shoved. Nothing moved. Ophelia had not decided to do it. Her body had. Heat surged from sternum to palms, then down into the temple floor through her bare soles. Silver-white lines flared along the old sigils carved between flagstones, racing outward in a web of light. The door wards sealed with a resonant hum. Blue fire in the braziers flashed white. Everyone stopped. Awareness prickled along Ophelia's spine, vast and clean and terrifyingly clear. She felt the ward lattice as if it were a second skeleton under the temple. And with that sensation came another truth rising from depths she had never touched. Lineage memory, white wolf blood waking under pressure and refusing erasure. I lock this chamber under temple right, she said, voice steadier than she felt. No one leaves until truth is entered and witnessed. Guinevere's face went bloodless, then flushed with rage. You think power makes you legitimate. You are tribute stock with a lucky heat cycle. The insult hit old wounds and found no purchase. Ophelia stood inside her own name now. The doors shuddered once from outside impact. A second blow followed, then a command barked in the corridor, muffled by bronze and wardlight. Kane's voice. Relief slammed through her so hard her knees nearly gave, but she kept her gaze on Guinevere. Call him off, Elder Corvin demanded, suddenly sweating. Open the doors. No, Ophelia said. Anwen stepped forward with ritual knife and cut her own palm in one swift, controlled stroke, letting 3 drops fall to the trial bowl at the brazier's base. Healer witness entered. Ophelia took the knife next. The steel kissed her thumb, sharp and brief. She held her hand over the bowl and let her blood join Anwen's. The bowl flared silver. Mother witness entered, she said. Guinevere laughed once, brittle. All this drama to avoid the inevitable. Your pup belongs to governance. She moved with serpent speed then, snatching a silver birthing blade from the instrument tray and driving forward through the gap between attendants. Her target was clear, low and vicious, and the chamber exploded into motion. Anwen shouted. Guards surged. Ophelia pivoted, but not far enough. The blade flashed toward her abdomen. A body hit Guinevere from the side with controlled force. Kane caught her wrist mid-strike, fingers locking over tendon and bone, blade halted inches from Ophelia. He had come through the warded doors by command authority only an apex ruler could force through temple bindings. His soldier pretense died in that instant. Amber bled fierce through his irises, molten and unmistakable. Power rolled off him in a palpable wave that bent heads on instinct. Drop it, he said, and the order carried the old language of kings. Guinevere stared up at him, disbelief collapsing into horror. You. Kane twisted her wrist just enough to disarm. The blade rang across stone. You forged Elder Decree, poisoned ritual drink, and initiated seizure under falsified law. You would choose her over Ironhold? His expression went feral with contempt. She is Ironhold. Guinevere spat. You were sold because you were nothing, aiming it past him like a final spear into Ophelia's center. Ophelia crossed the distance in 3 strides. She caught Guinevere's arm, turned it behind her back, and drove her against a moon-etched pillar. Light snapped from Ophelia's palms, silver threaded with gold from the bond, crackling around Guinevere's wrists like living manacles. The noblewoman gasped as the restraint tightened. I was sold by cowards, Ophelia said, each word precise, carrying to every corner of the chamber, and still became what you could never buy. Silence followed, dense and absolute. Elder Isabet dropped to one knee first, then Corvin, then Maelor, sweat tracking down his temple as he bowed to Kane without daring to lift his eyes. Cain faced the assembled court that had poured into the temple vestibule once the wards opened under his command. Courtiers, captains, attendants, all packed shoulder to shoulder beneath moonfire and smoke. "I am Cain Nightshade," he said, voice resonant and cold. "Alpha King of Ironhold, returned in concealment to investigate council corruption." He did not glance at Guinevere as he continued. "Findings are complete." He stepped beside Ophelia, not in front of her. "By crown prerogative and temple witness, Guinevere Nightshade is stripped of title, rank, and land rights. She is sentenced to life-bound exile beyond all recognized pack borders, marked under warding scent so no court may harbor her claim." Guinevere thrashed once against the light binding. "You cannot exile blood." "I can," Cain said. "I just did." He turned to the kneeling elders. "Public recantation, now." Elder Corvin's voice shook. The confiscation edict was fabricated under private coercion and unlawful inducement. The Valewood crest was forged. The ruling has no legal standing. "Louder," Cain said. Corvin repeated it, louder, until scribes at the back could record every word. Anwen moved to Ophelia's side and pressed steady fingers to her pulse. "Contractions are easing," she murmured. "Induced spike, not active labor. You and the little one are holding steady." The sentence nearly undid Ophelia. She let one breath break against Cain's shoulder, then straightened again as guards took Guinevere into custody, wrists bound in iron etched for oath-breakers. Guinevere twisted at the threshold, hair loose now, dignity in shards. "This pack will tear itself apart for her." Cain's answer did not rise in volume. It did not need to. "Then it will do so under better laws." When the doors closed behind the disgraced noblewoman and her escort, the temple exhaled into stunned quiet. Smoke from the burned decree still hung in pale ribbons beneath the high beams. Ophelia watched it unravel and felt, for the first time since the border march, that the script had changed in her favor because she had seized the pen. The healers moved them to the inner sanctum once the crowd dispersed, a round chamber carved into the temple's oldest stone where moonlight fell through a narrow oculus like poured milk. Anwen checked Ophelia again with efficient hands and softer eyes, then nodded once. "Both heart rhythms are strong," she said. "No seizure, no further contractions tonight if she rests and drinks what I give her, and nothing else." "I follow your directives," Cain said. Anwen's mouth twitched. "That should terrify most rulers. In this case, it reassures me." She gathered her satchel and paused at the door. "Temple Guard is reset under Crown command. You have privacy." When they were alone, quiet pressed in, profound after the chaos. Cain stood 3 paces away, hands at his sides, as if uncertain where to place all the force still coursing through him. Without the soldier mask, his presence felt larger, older, threaded with disciplined violence and a care that had never asked to be seen. "You should be furious with me," he said at last, "for concealment. For bringing you into danger I was trying to contain." Ophelia sat on the edge of the low sanctum bed, palms on her thighs to stop their trembling. "I am furious with everyone tonight. You are not everyone." That startled a faint, broken laugh out of him, gone almost before it arrived. He came closer and sank to one knee, not as king, not as performance, as choice. He removed the heavy collar clasp at his throat and bared the vulnerable line beneath his jaw, pulse visible in moonlight. "I will not claim what you do not offer," he said. "Not as alpha, not as mate. But if you want it, if you choose it, I ask for mutual marking now. No court, no witnesses, only oath." The crux sat between them, simple and immense. Marking meant permanence, power braided, law and instinct fused, where either could weaponize or protect. Yet nothing in his posture pushed. He waited. Ophelia rose and stepped into his space. Her fingers found the scar on his cheek, traced it once. I choose it, she said, on one condition. Name it. You stand with me, not over me. In council, in law, in all of it. His eyes held hers with a fierce reverence that made her throat tighten. Agreed. She nodded. Then yes. He stood and turned enough to expose the junction where neck met shoulder, then paused. May I mark you? Yes, Kane. He brushed her hair aside with trembling care. His breath touched her skin first, warm and unsteady. Then his teeth found the curve of her shoulder, pressure precise, controlled. Pain came bright and clean, a sharp line that opened into heat almost instantly, heat that spread down her arm and across her chest like sunlight through cold water. She gripped his forearms and stayed with it, stayed through the pulse that followed, through the moment pain transformed into a deep, anchoring pleasure that was not bodily hunger so much as recognition settling into place. Mine, he whispered against her skin, voice rough with restraint, then pulled back enough to meet her eyes. Only if you answer. Ophelia took his wrist in both hands and turned it to the inside where the alpha vein beat hard beneath taut skin. Yours, she whispered, and then, because truth deserved the full shape, my mate. She bit. His breath broke on a low sound that was almost a growl, almost prayer. His free hand came to the back of her neck, not forcing, simply bracing as she held the mark a heartbeat longer and released. A bead of blood welled, bright in moonlight, then vanished under the flare of bond light igniting between them. Gold and silver rose in braided strands from their marks, arcing through the sanctum air like living filament before sinking back into skin and bone. The completion hit with startling force, a second heartbeat locking to her own, a doubled rhythm that reverberated from sternum to belly to spine. The low thrum in her chest, restless for days, finally settled into a steady current. Awareness flooded both directions. She felt his relief, vast and shaken. Felt old grief banked behind iron discipline, years of strategic solitude, the constant calculation of a ruler who trusted almost no one. In return, she knew he felt the scars she carried not as images, but as textures. The humiliation of cuffs, the chill of being discussed as policy, the stubborn core that had refused to disappear. None of it hidden now. None of it used as weapon. He leaned his forehead to hers, breathing hard. Yours, he said again, as if anchoring himself in the word. Mine, mate. She smiled through sudden tears she did not bother to wipe away. Mine, she answered. Yours, mate. For a while they only held each other, palms learning new map lines at shoulders and back, bodies recalibrating around the shared pulse. He wrapped a blanket around both of them and sat against the carved stone wall with Ophelia between his knees, one hand over her marked shoulder, the other spread gently over her lower abdomen. Moonlight moved across the floor in slow degrees. I was in the northern war camps when Guinevere began consolidating council favors, he said softly into her hair. When I returned, I had reports of forged levies, missing tribute records, displaced heirs. I hid as a soldier to trace the network without tipping the board. Then I met you in the armory and every strategy fractured. She tilted her head back against his chest. You kept choosing me anyway. I kept choosing right, he said. You happened to be at the center of it. She huffed a quiet laugh. That sounded almost romantic for a war king. I can do better with practice. The line was so dry it startled real laughter out of her, brief and bright, and the sanctum seemed to warm around it. He kissed her brow, then the unmarked side of her neck, reverent and careful of tender skin. No elder, no throne, no war outranks you. She turned in his arms and touched the fresh mark at his wrist. Then remember what you agreed. Stand with you, he said. Good. They slept in intervals, waking to check each other's breathing like new creatures in old bodies. At dawn, Anwen returned with bitter tea she brewed herself under Ophelia's watch and inspected both marks with professional approval. Clean bites. Stable bond integration, she said. I should charge temple rates for this level of emotional drama. Cain almost smiled. Send the invoice to the crown. By midday, the Great Hall was reset for emergency accord session. No feast banners, no music, just long tables, witness scribes, and every major pack representative summoned under royal seal. Ophelia entered at Cain's side in plain, dark wool, marking visible at her shoulder where the collar dipped. Murmurs rippled through the chamber and then stilled when Cain took his place, but remained standing as Ophelia stepped to the central lectern. Read the amendment, he said to the chief scribe, as drafted by Ophelia Valewood. The scribe swallowed and read. Tribute exchange outlawed across all signatory pacts. Reproductive decrees, invalid without explicit maternal consent witnessed by independent healer. Bonded parent guardianship superseding counsel seizure in succession matters. Criminal penalties for adulterated ritual substances. Sanctuary statute expanded to include all pregnant petitioners regardless of rank. When he finished, silence held for 3 breaths. A gray-bearded envoy from the mountain packs rose. This reorders elder authority. Ophelia met his gaze. It reorders abuse. Another envoy, younger, scar along her brow, inclined her head. My sister was designated unstable after refusing a council match. She vanished in transport. I vote yes. One by one, voices entered. Debate was sharp, procedural, sometimes hostile, but no one could dismiss what had happened in the temple with half the court as witness and scent proof logged in the record. By twilight, seals were pressed in molten wax under moon sigil and crown. Cain signed last, then turned the document so Ophelia could add her name beside his as co-author and co-ruler. The room watched him bow his head as her seal met wax. 3 days later, in the same temple where chains had waited for her, Ophelia was raised as Luna Queen of Ironhold. Not robed in jeweled excess, but in white and iron gray with the new accord stitched in silver thread along the hem. Anwen stood among honored witnesses. The disgraced elders had been stripped and reassigned to archive labor under oversight. Corvin and Mailer were barred from adjudicating maternal law for life. Guinevere crossed the border at dusk under scent warding and armed escort, her exile mark recorded in every neighboring territory. At midsummer, moonlight spilled warm over the palace birthing chamber, windows open to jasmine and night rain. Anwen moved between hearth and bed with calm authority, while Cain held Ophelia's hand and let her crush his fingers without complaint through each wave of labor. No chains, no council pages, only chosen healers, trusted guards at the outer doors, and the bond pulsing steady between them. When their pup arrived, crying strong and furious at the world, Ophelia laughed and sobbed at once as Anwen settled the small, warm weight against her chest. Dark hair damp at the crown, tiny fist opening and closing against Ophelia's skin as if testing ownership of air. Cain knelt beside the bed, tears bright and unhidden, and pressed his forehead to both of them. "Hello, little one," he whispered. Ophelia looked from their child to the man who had once knelt in an armory pretending not to be a king, so she could keep one scrap of autonomy in a place built to strip it away. His mark warmed at her shoulder. Hers pulsed at his wrist. Outside, in the courtyard below, wolves gathered under torchlight and did not howl for conquest. They howled for welcome. At dawn, they carried their pup to the palace balcony wrapped in soft gray wool. The assembled packs filled the square, banners stirring in summer wind. Cain lifted his hand for quiet, then lowered it and stepped back, placing Ophelia at the front rail. She addressed them with her child in her arms and her mate at her side. Not overshadowing, not hidden. This kingdom was taught to confuse control with care, she said, voice carrying clear across stone. We will not teach that to our children. Not again. The crowd answered with a rolling assent, Not uniform, not mindless, but real. A beginning earned the hard way. Cain touched the small of her back, steady and warm. Ophelia leaned into that touch and looked out over Ironhold as morning light found the towers, the courts, the temple roof, where smoke from last night's offerings rose clean into open sky. Strength, she thought, had worn many masks here for too long. Now it had a new face, law with consent, power with witness, tenderness that did not yield an inch of resolve. Their pup yawned, tiny and indignant, and the two of them laughed softly together while the kingdom learned the sound.